you. I have a couple. In your papers, and from I presume it's from Stephen, Lucy 2. Where I'm on page 67. You needed to make inquiries of the governance as to whether councillors had any knowledge of actual or suspected frauds. So, in executing that duty, James, are we all good there? So I have no knowledge. I'm happy to sign that off.
So I have no knowledge either, and have satisfied myself that we don't. And so, if you know something I don't know, then I'd love to know. But
no, I just think that was an action that should have been pulled through to this committee. Right, and the other question was around recommendation number 8, and I wonder. It says recommends that the Port of Napier align their balance date, which I agree with, but I wonder if you should be recommending HBRICS instructs them to for the correct order, and I'm certainly happy to take that discussion back to HBRIC as a councillor director.
So you're thinking that, as stated, we need to be more explicit that HBRIC conduct that, or are you comfortable
Yeah,
with
well, they're the ones who have oversight, so I was just looking how Peter and I can be helping there and how to make it technically correct.
All right, so with the inclusion of recommends that HBRIC request.
We didn't know that HBRC requests HBRIC to request the Port of Napier.
We request it, we instruct HBRIC.
We can't.
no, you can't.
We'll pass that sentiment through very clearly.
I thought the sentiment was perfectly clear at the start.
Okay, well, we've had that insertion in there. I'm not thinking that it materially affects too much of the recommendation suite there. Are you comfortable? Are there any other questions about any of the recommendations in the actual paper item 6 and then the lately distributed schedule coming from that meeting? Are there any other questions that you'd want to explore other than what Councillor Hewitt's just raised? If not, I'm happy to move that we receive the report as written, which includes the recommendations around the port we've just discussed, these others, and then that goes to Council for adoption.
Seconded.
Seconded there. Any discussion? Oh, sorry, we've had a mover and a seconder. Do you wish to speak, Councillor, on that? Nor do I. Are there any other speakers to the recommendation?
Probably worth noting that that's change in process in terms of talking to the Port of Napier, because at the moment HBRIC is the owner of the port. So the council really needs to ask or instruct HBRIC to ask the port.
Yes, I think we've covered that off, Councillor.
Have you?
With that changed, amended recommendation.
Okay,
yes.
That's fine. Thank you.
Yes. Any other comment, Councillor Wilson?
Just, Chair, does that include 10 on the back page, considering what it says at the top?
Anything in specific?
Is that part of the public record now?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay. Well, the only other thing, you've got your numbers wrong. 5, 6, 7, 8. It used to be like that at Freystown School anyway.
5, 6 plus a few, 9, 10.
Oh, I see what you're saying. 5, 6.
Offended Wilson's email.
Sure. Yes. Can we note that, Madam Secretary? Well, we've got a slight numbering issue there. Can we have that
Mr. Chairman,
corrected?
can we just clarify that, because it may be that there was no recommendation from item 7? No, there wasn't. So that's probably why number 7 is actually missing, rather than a mistake.
I think that's most likely to be.
The only... Or on the, because it does become part of the substandard recommendations, is what I'm saying.
I would have thought
I
standard practice would be that when the resolution is written up, any reordering things are undertaken at that time, so it doesn't alter the substance of it, just as long as the resolution at the end makes sense. It's not going to be tied up about that.
So essentially what we're saying, Councillor, is that we're receiving that report and the recommendations that accompany that. So that's where we've got to. We've had a mover and a seconder, if you're comfortable with that course of action.
Very comfortable with the second. I'm happy with
And therefore I'll put the recommendation that we receive the report, Unless there are other objections. All those in favour of receiving the report? All those against? Are there any abstentions? There being none, the recommendation is accepted. Unanimously, in fact. Thank you, Councillor Barker. I think we need to move to... are we looking at the update on the Clifton Tangoio Coastal Hazard Strategy? Is that the one we want to do next?
So I have called, the Graham's there.
Graham, can you help us out there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't realise Councillor Bevan was here, so he I'll say, almost hand the cudgel to him to present this, but that'll be a bit unfair. But could perhaps add any comments or commentary to this update. So, what do I push here? Enter. So this update is a precursor or a heads up associated with the meeting proposed for next Monday, the 25th. With a specific focus on a joint council-councillor workshop looking at funding options and issues associated with the Coastal Strategy project. But I thought associated with that would give you a high-level update, so that as a sort of a precursor to that, we've got a memo with some additional details coming out hopefully in the next couple of days. But just to outlay some of the thoughts and proposals that we've discussed, certainly through the funding subgroup element of this project. We've got a range of things on the go in this particular project concurrently, and one of them is obviously the funding element, which is coming sharply into focus of recent times as we get through the optioneering and the costing phase of the project. So this project, as proposed, is currently one large new regional project. If the support of the councils sees it get to that phase, obviously associated with the joint councils being ourselves, Hastings and Napier at the moment, but obviously with a focus of what I call a legacy or a long term project that could ultimately see us considering options for the coastline over the entire Hawke's Bay coastline length. So other councils at e.g. Waira and Central Hawke's Bay could ultimately be involved in this project in time. The focus and I say the genesis of this project has been from Tangoio to Clifton. And it's been through several phases that in fact have predated me, but I've stepped into the stage 3 part of the project, which is really looking at the options and optioneering for solutions to the Clifton to Tangoio element of the Coastal Strategy project. Where we're at the moment is currently refining a range of options. So we've been through a multi-criteria analysis approach, which is seems to be a fashionable process to dealing with these large and complex projects in an effort to look at all the significant issues, go through a scoring mechanism and attempt to rank or prioritise the various solutions that are on the table. Won't go through all the cells, but the coastline has been broken into a range of cells. We've actually focused on 9 what we call priority cells, which are broadly the Clifton, Tiwanga, Hamoana, East Clive section, which we call the southern cell or the southern panel. So we have 20 odd representatives that have been on the journey for the southern panels. And the northern areas are Ahuri, Pandora, West Shore, Bayview and Whirinaki, which is the northern panel. So broadly split north and south of the port. The process is started with, I suppose, no preconceived ideas about where we may end up. Managed retreat or retreat the line options were, I suppose, considered significant issues, particularly around the Hamoana, Tiwanga areas where we've got problems in the here and now. But the emphasis through, I suppose, both the technical application and the learnings and the input from the various panel members has ended up with a reasonably strong emphasis back on protection options and what we call a short to medium term. And I suppose helpfully this project, because it's looking at that 100-year time horizon, the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement sort of advisory, it's been helpfully broken into what we call a short, medium and long term. So up to 20 years, 20 to 50 and 50 to 100. And it's probably unlocked the, personally, I think this has unlocked the issue for us quite substantially around, we've either had people in protect at all costs, and that's, all they could see to those that said, well, it's inevitable we're going to be retreating, and that was the only option on the horizon. We're looking at these timelines and terms. I think's allowed everything to come on the table and without getting into the detail, but triggers and options to look as to when you would change from one option or mechanism to another is allowed to be accommodated in these long time horizons. Equally important to have your eyes open as to what you're committing to, though, that you go down one path that actually locks you in or can lock you into only a few of the options that are potentially on the table. So we started with 18, we whittled them down to 6, and we've got down to these preferred options within each of the cells, and, as I say, broken into these short, medium and long term. The broad protection mechanisms, probably not surprisingly, have ended up with renourishment and groins as a significant focus. Again, not surprising on the basis that we renourish it, we're sure, and have done for a good number of years, and we have a modest number of groins in the southern area, so there's those, I suppose, on the ground experiences that people can rate to and have an opinion about. Additional to that is obviously sea walls, which is about sort of parallel protection, so keeping the shoreline location where it currently is. Again, not surprisingly, the cost of this will be significant. It's what we're looking at the moment, and we've, having got down to the preferred options, we're pricing all options, and subject to where certainly the discussions on Monday between the councils around how this thing might be funded and managed into the future. We may well have to look at second and third priorities if the preferred options are unaffordable. So I think the panels are sort of breathing a sigh of relief that some of them have perhaps ended up with what they wanted or what they expected, but there's still a dose of reality around us pricing these things and going through a mechanism of determining affordability. Equally, the options all can and will come into play at different times. So we've got here and now problems in the Hamawana, Tiawonga area. East Clive, some problems that are manageable and don't need responding perhaps in the immediate time frames, and some of those that are on much longer time horizons. So we've got issues about what, when, what we will do and how much it will cost. So it's quite a disparate project over a long period of time, but we've got to drag all those things together and see how we could, fund and coherently manage this thing into the future. So in looking at the funding issues, as I say, we set up a funding subcommittee which representatives from the 3 councils and members of the TAG group. And Philip Jones of PJ Associates has been appointed. He's given extensive advice over the years around rating mechanisms and funding mechanisms for various projects. An example here would be our large flood control schemes, sort of complex classification and rating type schemes, with a thought that might be a mechanism or an approach that would work for this project. Certainly the issue over long time horizons is consistent with the flood control schemes. Having said that, all options are on the table, and obviously recognising that the representatives of the 3 councils will have a strong opinion about perhaps what size and shape this project is, how it may be funded, who will fund it, and how it might be either done in a coordinated way or by one body. So at this stage, all options are on the table, but there has been some clear thinking around things that we believe have worked. So the example in our organisation is the large flood control schemes, but all the issues associated with targeted rates, loans and contributory funds are on the table. The issue for the funding group and discussions, in fact, that have predated my time in the project, but that one option that's been floated is a consideration for HPRC to be the lead organisation, primarily around the concept that, for administrative efficiency, a one-stop shop, that's something that's been floated, but obviously mixed in with that is a plethora of options around, well, if that's the case, who and how do we fund the thing? Do we fund it through the various councils? Do we do it as a exercise solely with HPRC? Having said that, the intent of the project is for it to stand on its own, have its sort of governing governance arrangements that would allow it to survive into the future and survive council cycles, and would commit to a regular review period, approximately 10 years, I think, Peter, associated with both assessing performance and progress with significant question marks on what climate change is and whether predictions are going to be better or worse than predicted, but also consistent with that comment I made around we will have triggers where we make decisions earlier or later than predicted. We've assumed information based on our current knowledge, but also there's an expectation we'll obviously learn and experience things as we go, particularly with the question mark around the progression of climate change experiences. So that's the, I suppose, the preview or the prelude to a meeting on Monday with all councillors, subject to who turns up, and the initial discussions around potential funding options or how we would manage this project into the future.
Peter, can I ask you to make a comment, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for your summary, Graham. Perhaps just a little bit more background to the meeting that we have on the 25th. So what we deliberately decided to do when we were doing the assessment of the 100-year pathways that the panels were considering, we made a decision not to put money on the table. So their preferred pathways were based on a set of criteria that didn't involve cost, quite deliberately. But now we've got to the point where they have scored those pathways and established what the preferred pathways are for each of the units of the coastline that we've looked at. We now have to introduce money and see if that changes their preferences. The difficulty we have is that we can't introduce money until we have agreed amongst the councils a set of principles that would apply to the funding both now and in the future. And there's a whole bunch of options around funding that you have to consider, like because it's a 100-year time frame we're looking at, how do you manage current payments for something that might not need to be done for 50 years' time, for instance? What's your trigger that causes you to move from one part of the pathway to another? For instance, from re-nourishment to retreat, or re-nourishment to building groins, or whatever the pathway establishes. The contributory fund, which Graham mentioned, who's going to hold the money for it? How do you divide the payments up, or the proportion of payments that might be involved between the community at large and those people who live on the coast or close to the coast? Do we have 3 or 4 series of rating areas, for instance, for this purpose? So there's a whole bunch of decision making that involves the cost of these pathways that we really need to get pretty strong guidance, I think, from all of the councils. And the meeting on Monday is because we need to have a conversation with the councils about funding and see if we can't get pretty much agreement in principle before we go back to the panels and say, well, look, this is the pathway, this would be the cost, and this is how the cost would be split. So that meeting on Monday, on the 25th, becomes really important, and that's why we changed it from a joint committee meeting to a meeting of all of those councillors who can get there, so we can actually go through, explain what's involved in this, and make sure that we've got at least a buy-in in principle for what we're going to put before the panels before we take this project further. And the project is likely to run into, I think, probably the beginning of next year before we get the final recommendations back to the 3 councils.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any questions arising out of this presentation? Councillor Belford.
Maybe I should know the answer to this because I've been a participant in the process, but Peter, are any of the short-term mitigation or precautionary measures expected to be taken in the next 3 years of our LTP or not?
Are you saying is there going to be expenditure?
Yeah.
Oh, I would say for sure there will be. The seawall at Clifton being just one example that comes to mind immediately. Some of the others won't be a priority, but I'd be really surprised if we weren't already spending money in 3 years' time.
So I've only seen the southern cell aspects of this. Paul's seen the northern cell. So is there yet to be a sort of a sorting out of, all right, what would be the initial 6, 8, 10 projects that might actually need funding in that 3-year period?
Yes, because we haven't determined which projects are which of the pathways are the chosen ones at this point in time, and what they're going to cost and what they're going to involve in the short term for expenditure. And until we've gone through that process, we can't answer that question. But I'd like to think that the timing for this will give us the opportunity to consider whatever is a priority as part of our funding for the long-term plan.
Parker.
Thank you. That's a really interesting presentation. When you say you haven't introduced money yet, Peter, I'm curious as to what you mean by introduced money. Whose money? What's it for? And what are you dealing with here? So.
Yeah, so that's the reason for trying to agree with the joint councils on a set of principles so that you can allocate the cost. And let's say, for argument's sake, you've got a project in Hamoana that's going to cost $10 million, for argument's sake. What you're going to have to do based on a set of principles is break that cost down between people who are the immediate beneficiaries because they're on the coastline and they get protection, and what the public component of that is going to be because you're protecting roads and infrastructure and so forth. And so getting a set of principles agreed on how the funding needs to be split is absolutely fundamental before you can put options in front of your panels and say, well, you know, the people living in the coastal communities, this is what it's going to cost you. And you can't give an exact figure, but you can at least give an indicative range as to what percentage of that $10 million and over what period of time might be their cost. And that's why their preferred option or their preferred pathways might change once they see what's being proposed in regards to the costs.
Well, with respect to that, there are options, and we have at this stage a 100-year time planning zone. So there are pieces of infrastructure and roads which are put in place simply because the topography and the geology at the time suited to it. What thought is being given to alternatives that might be cost effective, by the way? And one of them is just for example, off the top of it, the road going out north of Napier along there, that big shingle tombolo with a metre or more of sea rise and sea surge could be utterly unsustainable. You might have to defend it with huge amounts of concrete. So what thoughts have been given to having an alternative road which goes round through the hills? So I'm if we're just going to maintain the status quo, I think the analysis is weak in my view.
Well, that's certainly not the pathway's intent to maintain status quo. That might be the case in the short term for some of them, but certainly not in the longer term. But in regard to what's being considered, Graham, I think I'd have to defer to the technical guys.
Well, certainly the example of the State Highway and the airport as examples in zones, cells, West Shore and Bayview, those issues have been considered. They are part of the optioneering. The NZTA, for example, sit at the table and therefore have given both technical and expert advice and commentary around their assets and how we might accommodate them based on all of the options that are on the table. So, consideration is being given to alternative routes versus the cost of protection versus the cost of protecting their asset versus houses and other private property within each of the cell units. So it's actually broken into reasonably finite and discrete assets within each zone. So,
Chair, sorry, Chair, can I just make the observation that one of the things we're trying to do with this exercise is get away from a rolling maul of continuous discussion between councils and communities over particular bits of infrastructure over the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years, where everyone is another debate about whether we'll fund a seawall at Clifton or we'll fund retreat at West Shore or another nourishment program, etc., and put some money away, agreed on a basis, into a fund so that essentially it's depoliticised. There's a strategy and a bunch of principles that everyone's signed up to, and that money can then be apportioned into the different projects as we go. So very much that takes us to getting some agreement up front around the whole design of this, and not therefore getting into ongoing discussions about individual pieces of infrastructure over LTP cycle after LTP cycle, or annual plan, etc., etc. And that makes us quite challenging, because it does require No. All I'm saying is that all of the technical details is being considered, but what we're trying to achieve on Monday is that discussion around the principled approach that councillors want to take across the three councils to setting aside funding to then be applied to all of the technical examples that you give.
Can I, Councillor, I just want to... Obviously, this is an issue that we're going to have to turn our minds to, get our eyes on, and there's an opportunity come Monday to do that. So we're going to get into that detail, I'm sure. We've got a limited scope at this point to actually engage, because we don't know a lot of the answers. Councillor Graham, have you got something significant to ask?
I hope it's significant. I just don't want to get in front of ourselves here. I understand what James just said, and that's a very good idea. Get a principle in place so we do politicise it. But what I would like to see, and I was just wondering whether this has been done, you're getting to the point where you understand what's going to happen in the next, and it's not 100, let's face it, it's 50, if we believe in global warming. So what we think is going to happen to our coastal villages and our coastal assets over the next 50 years. I would like to see a report on that, simplistic report to our community, so they know what is going to happen, what we think, not what's going to happen, what we think is going to happen, so they can make their commercial decisions. Because if you've got a little old lady living in Hamawana, she might look at it and say, well, I don't care, I'm staying. You might have a young family there and say, I'm going to move. But there may be another family who lives in Havelock say, well, I don't believe in all this global warming, I'm going to go there. As long as we put the facts on the table as we see it, and then in the interim period, while we do all these other things and worry about roads and stuff, individuals can make commercial decisions, their own decision, based on the information we give them. And I'd like to see that happen. I don't want what the government's just got into with all that secrecy, you know. We need to put it in front of people and say, this is what we think the risk is.
Yeah, okay, so...
They can make their own decision.
So, built into this process we've gone through are two public feedback loops, and we've had the first one, which was done after the options for the pathways were tabled, right? So it described each of them and gave people an opportunity to see what the threat was to their coastline or the coastline more generally and so forth. There's a second one that will come up after the panels have considered the costs and determined what their preferred pathway priorities are. And the idea is to have public meetings on both the northern panel and the southern panel, where we will put those pathways on the table and the costs that are proposed, so that people can look at them, they can go back and they can see what the risks are, they can make their own assessment, they can go to the website, they can check out any address in the region that they want, and they can actually get a pretty clear understanding of what's going on and feed into that process. And as a consequence of that feedback, the panels will then have a final meeting to determine whether they want to change what they're going to recommend to the councils or not.
Thank you.
I think it's also important to add to that, Councillor Graham, is that on the Hawke's Bay Coast website, the actual assumptions and the knowledge and the issues as we understand them now are clearly spelled out. So issues of inundation, erosion, 2065, 2120. So that information is all publicly available. It's been publicly available throughout the process, acknowledging the panels are a fair representative of the community anyway. And the second element is there are two obviously relatively substantial reports being produced from the two zones that will spell out both the process, the information and the assumptions as we understand them at the moment, acknowledging, as you say, that we're people on a continuum from disbelieving to thinking we're perhaps undercooking it. So certainly the information's available as we've interpreted the decisions we've made, and our interpretations of here and now are available to everyone. Hawke's Bay Coast.
Just we've three quick questions.
HB Coast, sorry.
Mr. Waka, Councillor Hewitt and Councillor Phil Sewell.
In terms of considering the mitigation front, I don't hope you necessarily expect an answer. Have you done any costing in terms of approach using levies or levies? I'd say, like when I was in New Orleans, they've got kilometres of these levies that go up about that high on the slant and whatever.
Yeah.
They seem to be very effective, so what's the cost?
Again, without dwelling on all the options, we've had 18 options on the table, of which levies or stop banks, as we call them, are a feature. An example of where we would apply those is what we call a retreat the line option. So rather than managed retreat, where you would take everyone in perhaps a frontline community and shift them somewhere else, shift them to another pre-identified area, is a retreat the line option is something we may consider, and there's 2 cells without putting the detail on the table where we have that as an option. So we would actually build something like a levee that might be a street or so back. You sacrifice on the basis of understanding where the erosion's going, but you protect the greater community with an interim retreat option. So all of those things are on the table as examples.
If you only did it partially, the water would just go around, wouldn't it?
Oh yes, sorry. They are tied into features that the cell arrangements are contiguous. It gets relatively complex. As an example, in Pandora, where we're looking to protect the inner Pandora upper estuary area, and obviously we've got to tie it into structures that are fully protected.
Thank you. Can you tell me, Gans, how this is going to be extrapolated down so that south of where the Clifton to Tangoio, the boundaries are, how we can be benefiting further along the coastline from what you're learning, and how you'll be looking, or how the council will be looking to educate the public to these sort of measures, because at the moment I'm observing a bit of a dumping ground for tyres as coastal protection.
Yeah, it's a couple of questions here, Councillor Hewitt, but certainly the issue about tyres and railway irons and what's termed vertical permeable sills for a strange technical name is what's referred to, and a strong degree of support in the sort of the Clifton Tiawonga area. Look, the learnings, I suppose the benefit of this project is we're spending a substantial sum of money through these certainly first 3 stages, and both the learnings and the optioneering that we're looking at would have relevance to anywhere along the coast, I think, and the fact that we've ended up with whittling the 18 down to sort of a hardcore of 6 options, I think is consistent with both what we've built and experienced in sections of our coast already that have relevance, whether it was in Central Hawke's Bay or Waira or Mahia. In my eyes, it would simply be size and scale, and certainly the comment I've made a couple of times in the funding meetings is that I can see the likes of those areas coming on probably sooner rather than later in respect of issues that they've got and how we would accommodate them. So it's not only about, as Councillor Beaver says, the here and now and how on earth we fund what we've got, but it's also keeping an eye on at what point would either of your 2 areas, for example, come on the radar, and how would this fund accommodate that, acknowledging as Peter said, that we'd look at the immediate beneficiaries, the broader beneficiaries, and then the ultimate regional issues. And that's going to be a challenging space, but I think certainly we need to be thinking about the fact that this would and could be something substantially bigger.
Thank you, Graham. I think we'll wind that up. We might just wind it up. Yeah. Try them on Monday.
Just in terms of the costing, have you factored in intergenerational benefit, and the fact that people who are born in 100 years' time should be paying for this?
Absolutely, and the one of the scoring criteria is, I'm trying to think of the correct term, Peter, I remember I was going to say downstream effects, but it's the knock-on effects both, and it's been considered in 2 ways. One was that if we build something in a particular area, and renourishment's a good example where, from West Shore there's benefits in Bayview and Whirinaki, and how we accommodate those, so you can spend some money here but others are prospering, and obviously the intergenerational or the next generation that should be picking up its share of the burden versus what is our, and that's the expertise of Philip Jones in terms of his advice around ultimate fairness and equity here and now, but also the fact that we've got to consider this for 100 years.
Thanks. Thank you, Graham. Just want to wind this up with 3 quick comments. One, we've got a lot of work to do, and I think we all should go on to the living wage over the next 3 months, because I think we'll be better off if we did, because that's the workload that we've got in that period, including this latest imposition. So Monday's a good day to attend this, to gain insights and to ask those extra questions. Secondly, I'd like to thank and congratulate Graham for his work, and Peter particularly for his governance work in this. We're very lucky to have that level of leadership going on at that in this issue and leading the region on it. Thirdly, I'm concerned about once again being past the baby. We already hold the tourism baby. CDM is coming our way, and now it looks as though we've got regional infrastructure coastal infrastructure to look after as well. Beware bundles are wrapped up in swaddling. So we'll move on to the next item. That was a verbal presentation, so there's no recommendations on that I'm taking. So we'll move on to where are we at, Madam Secretary?
Human resources.
Are we doing the HR?
Yep.
So we've got you on, Viv, our most important person in the House.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, councillors. Toro and Mike, tēnā kōrua. Basically, I leave the report as read. There's just maybe 2 or 3 points from my report that I would just like to highlight very quickly, and then obviously any questions that any councillors may have. The first point from the sentence 3 is just, I think it's really rewarding for the organisation that we've been able to have 10 internal staff members retained by applying for and being successful in other positions in the council, and I think it is a rewarding thing and a good mechanism of retaining staff. There's nothing else really on that report until it comes to health and safety, and I guess that really important point there is to acknowledge the death of Michael Taylor during the year, and just the impact that had on the organisation, and not only that, but certainly on a personal level, to sit here regularly and try and reassure you that the procedures and policies we have in place keep our staff safe, and for something as tragic as that to happen, it really does make you question, and certainly in terms of my own confidence, it does leave you with those questions. Having said that, and we haven't got the WorkSafe report back, we do believe that our policies and procedures, and I still strongly believe that, are as best as we can do, and that we hope we never have to face something as tragic as that again. Just a couple of the other things. I think one of the big successes we've had is in terms of contractor management, and our joint efforts with the other 4 councils in the region to use SiteWise as our pre-approval for contractors. It's been a massive task. Just for us alone, there's more than 300 contractors, consultants that we've had to work through with to either look at the level of risk they've got and whether they should be exempted from SiteWise. So that's something that's been really rewarding to now be seeing the effects of that on organisations and the numbers of those contractors that are acknowledging that has lifted their eyes in terms of health and safety within the region. So that's really good. Just in terms of training, I think our ongoing commitment to leadership development, and as you'll note there, a training package we are working through with all our managers at the manager and team leader level, has just started and has been received really well, and we're getting good feedback from the assessors in terms of how that's going. 2 current collectives we've renegotiated this year, and those were done within a matter of hours, And I think, once again, that's rewarding and indicative of the good industrial relations within the organisation. So just in terms of the further commentary, I think we do face some real issues in terms of the ageing workforce, the institutional knowledge we have with a number of staff, the difficulties we are still finding with recruiting key positions when they become available, notwithstanding our turnover is low. It does present us with some particular problems. We've just been trying to find a principal groundwater scientist. We thought we had somebody, but due to the change in visa arrangements, that person has now turned us down. So we do still face those real problems, and it does put extra workload on others while we try to search the country, search overseas to find those replacements. And there are some national issues that we are, as a collective group, regional councils, unitary authorities, looking at as to how we can improve those situations. And I think the other issue that I just wanted to point out is the ability to pay market rates rather than perhaps just applying an across-the-board increase. It is a tool that we need to retain, in my opinion, because it does mean that we can go to the market with those difficult positions and actually pay what the market is demanding. Otherwise, we are really not going to get the type of staff we need here. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman, and if there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Viv. I have some questions, but I'd like to hear yours first. Paul, can you help us?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Viv. I take it when we get the WorkSafe report back, we'll hear back from you about that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Any other question? Councillor Barker.
Yeah, I see that we've spent, from recollection here, 1.7% of budget on training, which we normally should be over 2. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a pure figure against the increase in the overall salary, so it's probably nearer 2, but there is a slight reduction this year.
Could we have some stage discussion of paper about that? Because I think one of the key things to any organisation is education and training and development. I see from the report you're talking about leadership development. I don't diminish that, but I would like us to have a considered report on what we intend to do in terms of invest in education and training in our staff, a clear strategy, and what we think is an appropriate fund for that. So the council to consider. It seems to be that this is on this side. So the other point you mentioned about staff safety in the field and the paper and things like that. I can see that there's a serious issue here because not all forms of communication work. You can't pick up a cell phone, you're in so on. I just wondered, have we given thought to, because as I understand, all the vehicles now are tracked by GPS? Sorry?
No, not by GPS, but we have anyone who's going outside of the cellular area will carry a satellite device, which can keep them in contact.
Well, I was just thinking, if we have, just to think about the problem, is that people go to the range. If our vehicles have GPS on them, and a lot of other communication devices don't work because of you're in tight corners and so on, wouldn't it be a thing we could think of doing if the vehicle doesn't move in a certain time? We then know there's an issue. And it's a little bit like when you go out in the bush, you say, I'll be back in 1 day. If you're not back in a day, people go and look for you. So if someone's going to an area, I'll estimate them there and be back out in 3 hours. The vehicle doesn't move in 3 hours. Person above sold, we know there's something we have to do. Just trying to figure a mechanism that we can.
So, look, absolutely, Councillor. This has been subject to the full loan worker review that we have done, looking at the range of devices we've got and the tracking processes we use. So, for example, in Michael Taylor's incident, we were able to identify that the vehicle hadn't moved for a period and where it was, which was part of the process we were going to understand why he hadn't checked back in on the time. So we have got processes around that, but we also have coverage issues. So our vehicle tracking fleet at the moment, while they receive a GPS signal to tell us what the location is, they report that information through the cellular network. So if they're in a cellular dead area, that device for tracking our vehicles doesn't work, which is why we've got the backup. In fact, we've got 2 different devices we use for satellite, and there are issues around cost and monitoring of that, which the exec has been giving consideration to recently. I don't know, Viv, if you want to add any further detail on that.
No, that covers it.
I'm satisfied. Thank you. That's good.
Thanks.
Councillor Dick,
Move the report be received.
I just have 1 or 2 questions first, would you mind? Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you. Do you action random drug tests amongst the staff?
No, we don't.
Why not?
We have a just cause.
And councillors, maybe.
We have a just cause policy. So if there is an incident or an event where the supervisor and another staff member believe that there could be a cause for that to happen, then we can do a drug test. But we don't do random drug tests.
Mr. Walker.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Councillor Barker's question about the training budget. I mean, surely there must be a connection between a failure to recruit and the lack of money spent or invested in people within the organisation pursuing a career path. So sure, in most organisations you spend a lot more money developing your people so they can move up the chain in terms of the skill base. So why are not we considering that? Or even cadets or Conservation Department, they have cadets.
Yeah, so look, I'll perhaps add in here, but we've got a range of programs, and Liz was just reminding me that in recent years, as part of managing our budget and trying to balance the budget, the training budgets have been cut year on year, and then additionally that percentage numbers dropped because we've been working on a budget track in the LTP, and the salary costs continue to grow, including because of the total FTE count that we have. Look, we would love to invest more in staff training, and so in the LTP process we will bring you some proposals in that regard. But obviously you will need to fund it relative to everything else. And look, take the point with recruitment. In river engineering, for example, I think we've been contributing to funding of a scholarship for the best part of a decade, I think it is, and we've yet to actually successfully pull somebody into the organisation as a result of that. Now that's just an example of how in many of our specialist areas there's no one in New Zealand at all, and then internationally there's a shortage of these people, and then there's great demand. So we are in an area which is in growth and demand domestically and internationally across many parts of our business, and it is very, very challenging for us to find people.
Can I just add, in terms of that training, one of the other things is actually, yes, there's a reduction in budgets, but it's actually using that budget smarter. So doing webinars or bringing courses here, which I work quite hard with the other 5 councils to say, we've identified this need, can we all get together and bring the trainer here rather than us flying all to Auckland and all that entails.
Thank you, Viv. We do need to rattle on. I've got a couple of questions as well, Viv, and they relate to your report. The thing that struck me most but didn't appear in your commentary or dialogue around it, one was on your page A59 in relation to the male-female agenda mix. For that, the thing that struck me most in your report was the equal distribution of staff, male and female staff overall, and yet our leadership groups were so disparate. And I'm intrigued with that and want to know what you're going to do about that, or what the Chief Executive and what proposals you're going to modify that. I've got some comments to make about it as well. But the second thing is ethnicity. I'm not seeing a breakdown of ethnicity and what you're going to do about, particularly in relationship with our engagement with Māori and our own Māori staff around that. So can you tell me why those
important features are not in your report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the difficulty is getting candidates into the pipeline, and in some of those professions there is a predominance of male applicants and not a significant number of female applicants. And I guess, as my report said, we have stuck with the premise that it's the best person for the job. But in terms of active initiatives, look, I take that we should be doing more, and it's, once again, it is a national problem, and a small group like the regional councils, I think that, once again, collectively and I'll forget that word, we should be looking at some of the options that we could do to get more female, or a better gender balance, better diversity balance.
Look, I'd just add to that particularly with the male-female split in team leader and management roles, it's trending in the right direction, albeit off a low base. So there's an improvement over last year to this year. The executive are mindful of that, and also our ethnicity mix, and so that's something we take into consideration when we are going through an employment process. So if we have the opportunity to tilt the balance, if you like, where we've got appropriately skilled and comparable candidates, then that is something we will take into account and try to address. As Viv says, it's quite difficult to do much more than that, but these things have a bit of momentum, and I suspect as people see more ethnic diversity in the organisation and more women in leadership, this organisation becomes a more attractive place for women and people of diverse ethnic backgrounds to want to come and work.
Thank you, James. Just one final question, then I'll move the report.
No, I'm actually offering to second Councillor Dick's motion.
Great. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Dick? Councillor Bevan? Any other speakers at this point? Mr. Walker?
We can get those out to our members, so that would be, I mean, PanPac does that to us, other outfits we're associated with. We've got lots of Ngāti Whāora that are qualified people working for Ngai Tahu and everybody else, but they'd love to come home.
Thank you, Tora. I do want to comment, if you don't mind holding you up a little bit more, because I became greatly agitated in reading this report, and I'm not accepting the line underpinning our value is to appoint the best person for the role. I know what that means, and for women in the organisation, they should challenge that, and I encourage them to do so. Very pleased to see the appearance of a new executive leader and Jess to the team, a great addition, demonstration that many women out there capable of doing the job. We have a problem in this council. Everywhere we look, we see the same problem. We look on the councillors themselves, we have one woman. We look at our various boards, the Port, HPRIC and the like. The issue is clear and transparent to everyone. I don't see any plans and strategies to do anything about that. I was greatly taken in discussion with Mana Hariri with their rangatahi program, where they were bringing on young people in apprenticeship type roles into governance. I'm more interested in the approaches adopted, for example, by the District Health Board, where they are saying to their employing managers, please give us the reason you did not employ, for example, women into particular jobs or Māori into particular jobs. They're asking that fundamental question to say, if there was a deficit in certain skill sets, what could be done to promote those candidates through. So it's a proactive approach that puts aside this simplistic notion of best person on the day, and it says let's be proactive in this and overcome what is clearly a major deficit when we have so few women in the workforce in our organisation that are not making it to the management level. So I'm asking for a greatly thought through strategies to come through in the long-term plan about how we're going to meet this deficit. Thank you, Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora
You've got 1.5
koutou,
minutes.
katoa, councillors. Toro and Mike, good afternoon. I'll just draw a couple of points to your attention and then I'll just hand it back over to you if you've got any further questions. Point 6 there in the report, really the bulk of media reporting that's coming through is through Hawke's Bay Today, is through print medium, which is also then duplicated out into its digital environment through the Herald website, but that still continues to be by far and away the most notable media reporting that we have against council's activities. Further over the page, just providing a summary for you at the top of the page there to give you some sense of the number of releases that come out of the organisation, how many articles per month we are picking up as being reported for referencing the regional council, the video interaction there, e-newsletters, the social posts, and I think there was, 47 in April versus 85 in August, and then the number of impressions. Impressions, it's not a natural figure, I guess. We do quite a lot of boosting through our use of social media, so that helps to drive, in some respects, it drives some of the lesser known work that we do, and it also helps to drive some of the posts and videos that we do that are of great interest to the community. So you really see some of those numbers jump up when we're posting videos that really do grab people's attention. Over the coming months, we do intend to significantly use much more video, and aim to push that out through various channels. So we're working hard on a strategy to uptake our use of video. And then finally, I'll just make a reference to this time of year, as we look ahead, there's a fair bit of work that goes into preparation for summer. Typically, we work quite closely with our harbour master on a summer life jacket, a navigational safety program, and also on pushing and promoting work outside, which includes the parks and trails that we have and the various elements of the outdoors. This summer that will also include quite a substantial focus on swimmability, tied in with the LAWA website, Land, Air, Water, Aotearoa, and there is a strong summer campaign that's being put together with very strong digital elements that I'm sure you will all see as we move into the warmer months when people start to dip their toes in the water. So that's the comments I've got. I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Drew. Is there any, Tom, Councillor Belford?
Yeah, I have a comment which I will adroitly put to you as a question. I'm wondering, on your point 6, which you indicated drives most of this analysis, you are talking about main media. And I'm just wondering, what does it take to be considered main media? Given that I'm aware there is a publication in the Bay read by 8,000 people, to the chagrin probably of some people around the table, that regularly covers key issues. This also includes a report on the council's science investment. This is just one of several issues this year that has talked about the tank process and why we should all be behind it. There have been discussions of the financial issues confronting the port. There have been discussions of EVs. There have been discussions of Peter's coastal program, and in the next issue there will be a feature on biodiversity. And so I'm just wondering, given that this particular publication reaches more people than all the rest of the ones on the list, with the exception of Hawke's Bay Today, why it might not be noted in future reports.
I'd be happy to include it in future reports.
Thank you.
That was a party broadcast on behalf of Tom's party.
I have to say, Chair, after reading the last issue of Bay Buzz, I thought it was the official organ of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council.
Or the Hawke's Bay Power Consumers Trust. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Drew. Just a comment and a question. A comment being that I find that the social media, especially the Facebook posts, have
since I've come on council, there's been a definite improvement in the way that we've been communicating with that in that space, and so thank you very much for that. It's much appreciated and quite well noticed. It's a lot easier for me, I know, to have discussions on Facebook than it was in the past. But my question is, paragraph 7, where you talk about negative items and positive items. Can you just, what's your criteria for a negative item and one that's a positive item?
Yeah, typically, most media is neutral, but on occasion there is one. One of my team goes through and just reads the articles, and on the basis of how they are written, we interpret whether they're positive, neutral, or negative.
With this morning's front page, which way would that go?
That would actually be neutral. Yeah.
Councillor Wilson.
Just to, this is probably the wrong forum to bring this up, but we are talking about communications. I'm just wondering whether there would be a possibility, for example, the presentation on Monday by Ken Taylor wasn't public, but it would be very useful for us as councillors if we could capture that on video, perhaps, for either watching at the time live and maybe contributing via emails or text or something to questions, or at least having it as an archive to use later. So I guess my question is, what does it cost to, you may not know this offhand, but what does it cost to run this setup, which is fantastically clear and very well presented now, but maybe have it as through the portal or something that perhaps councillors could use it either at the time or as a reference later on?
It really comes down to John's time and the costs around bringing the deck in. It's roughly starts about $500 to $600 to bring in that deck. But in terms of the some of the bite size and the shorter videos that we do film, we have the capability in house to film that and then put that up on the website. But it just doesn't draw on the same. We can't make it Facebook Live, for example, which is what we're doing now.
That's my point.
Oh, sorry.
As a resource for councillors, there's a whole lot of presentations in here. Is there a way we could more cheaply record or capture some of that stuff? Because you get a PowerPoint, that's fine, but when you see the presentation and hear the questions, especially from the staff in that instance, would be great value.
Yeah, we definitely can do that. I guess. Yep. Just so long as we're aware of what those needs are and we can resource it. Yeah.
Anything else you want to ask around that? So happy to remove the report. Thank you. Councillor Belford seconded. Councillor Bailey. Conflict of interest. Well, we'll go here with Councillor Graham and Councillor Bailey. How's that? Look, those in favour of receiving Drew's report, say aye. Those against? Those abstaining? And we note the conflict of interest. Notwithstanding. Now, is that it? Or have we got the minor items to do? And we had... And then we've got a public excluded minutes passing, so we've just got that. So let's rattle through, because we've got a subsequent meeting. The minor items, please.
Very briefly, Chair, there was a signing at Whakaki Marae on Friday, attended by the CE Chairman, myself, Mayor of Wairoa and a whole lot of interested locals, which means the ink is now drying on the contribution from MFE to the Whakaki Lake Fund over the next 3 years, which combined with us is $2.8 million.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. There being no other... Do you want to comment?
Sorry, just two quick items from me. One is the financial advisors to Port of Napier Limited wish to provide a presentation to all councillors on the financing options around the port development. That's something which is obviously commercially sensitive at the moment. We need to do in a workshop setting. The proposal is to do it next week, and I just wanted to test with councillors, given we've got a council meeting, whether you wanted to start the day a bit earlier, such as 8 a.m, and have that presentation prior to your pre-meet with me, or do you want to sacrifice your pre-meet with me, or would you like to put it on the end of the council meeting next week, noting that we have got the President of Local Government New Zealand planning to visit for a workshop-style engagement at the end of next week's council meeting as well.
Could I just put a quick plug in? I'm going to be going to out of here about 2 o'clock. We have Melbourne to see the sun, long overdue. So I prefer it strongly to be
Chair, I would too. I've got to go to Auckland that night.
Jim, as a matter of principle, the more important the issue is, the earlier it should be held.
And this is really important.
So are you happy to start at
9 to 10?
8 a.m. Or would you,
2 hours?
Well, it's just a question of you want to sacrifice your pre-meet with me, and I'm prepared to do that if you don't have any particular matters that you want to discuss with me.
We always have matters to discuss with you, James.
Indeed.
But this is really important. So, but
There's a compromise 8:30 start, and we have perhaps half an hour on my business and an hour, because I think the presentation warrants a good hour, I think.
more even.
Okay.
Well, our councillors comfortable with an 8:30 start next Wednesday.
Yeah, 8 o'clock. Would
8
be-
o'clock start?
8 o'clock start.
I've seen the presentation, so
Right.
you might do yours after that.
Yes, yeah. 8
How
o'clock
does that
start.
fit with you?
Sorry, is it 8 or 8:30?
8.
8 a.m.
How does that fit with you, Fenta?
Horse the night before, Chair.
And Debbie, you'll be later than that.
No, it's fine. I've seen
Yeah,
it.
okay.
Sorry, Chair. So look, the other issue was that, just to let councillors know, and it goes to the earlier conversation around the Māori seats, there is a proposal to have a extraordinary council meeting to receive the recommendations from Māori Standing Committee arising from the Huia Iwi that planned over the next month or thereabouts. I think we're looking at 15 November, is that correct? At 9 a.m. So just an early indication on that. I'm just hoping 15th of November. So if there are any concerns or objections, you can either let us know now or later, but that's what's proposed. And we have to have that for the statutory reason that we need to make a decision on the Māori seats in time, and there's just not a regular scheduled meeting on which to do that. 15 November. Is that a problem for you, Mike?
So it'll
'Cause
precede the Environment and Services Committee meeting on that day. We'll delay the start of that.
I'll be in Wellington, but Mike will be able to have it.
Okay.
We'll be able to report back to you before then, just generically anyway.
Sure, okay, that's good.
If I just based, I took leave to talk to Whanganui Roto about the same matter, and just they're having a meeting in the chambers here. Joyce Ann's got the agenda, and just explained to them that we're having them throughout the 4 tai whenua over the next 2 or 3 weeks. And on the 17th of October, Maori Committee will meet, and that'll probably not so much be the end of it for us, but we'll have the decisions then.
Great. So we're all agreed on that 15th date, 8 o'clock. Have that discussion. All right. Look, we've just got this very brief public excluded acceptance of minutes. So can I get a move into public excluded? Yeah, moved by Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Those in favour of moving into public excluded? Aye. Can we now move into that? And